Hi, I'm Mike Baker, and welcome to National Arts. Jackie Mason's latest Broadway endeavor, Jackie Mason, Politically Incorrect, recently closed a successful 2-year run at the John Golden Theater in New York. Well, Jackie's now on the road, and he's focusing his acerbic wit on one of his central passions, politics. He's even quick to point out our cultural differences and dissects a social issue or two. All, I might add, with equal aplomb.
You can't pretend that Jews and Gentiles behave the same way, because they don't. That's to pretend that there's no such thing as cultural differences, that there's no such thing as the study of culture. What is a culture? Culture means there's certain peculiar behavior patterns that are relevant to that culture. You can't claim that a Japanese wife behaves the same way as a Jewish wife. You could claim it if you're insane.
In a way, your show serves as a catalyst, but it's also good therapy for you because there's a certain amount of frustration, obviously, that's built up inside of you because you have this ability to see the core of the matter and have a clear understanding of what's going on in this country. Good therapy, but also a catalyst for the audience.
Well, I hope that I do some good, because I think by attacking all the fraud and all the injustice, you do some good. Unfortunately, there's not enough people listening, but it's worth talking about it.
You defend minority groups to the nth degree. I mean, you have fun with them, obviously, in your show, but you are the champion of minority groups, aren't you?
Well, I feel that minorities have never had true equality in America. It's only lately. I don't think it was ever a picnic to be any kind of minority in America. Even now, in some of the major corporations of this country, they allow minority people to reach only a certain level. They give them every opportunity. They give them even an unequal degree of opportunity. They give even an unfair special opportunity and special preference to certain minorities. But they only let them go so far. You still see very few black or Hispanic people on the top levels of any corporation. You still see very few Jews on the top levels of most of the corporations. You see more Jews than Hispanics or blacks, but there's still a great level of discrimination because it's still a special network. And they still don't feel comfortable giving the Jew or the other minority people, or even Italians, always suffered from the problem that they weren't acceptable to the Protestant Gentiles.
If you couldn't use your racial stereotypes, you couldn't tell any story. Every time you see a play, if you see a businessman as a Jew, should you say you should cut that out because everybody will think Jews are businessmen? What if an Englishman plays a prime minister? So you say you should get a Frenchman to play it because they'll think all English people are prime ministers? If you're casting a show, if you're telling a story about the mafia and you show 2 Italians, are you going to say you shouldn't show Italians because everybody will think the mafia are Italians? So before you know it, according to you, every girl should play a boy, every horse should play a chair.
You have to judge progress not by how many people are in a certain field, but by their disposition to go into that field. When people say there's no black doctors, I attack the idea that it's symbolic of discrimination. Nobody said it's symbolic of discrimination that there are no Jews owning Chinese laundries, or that no Jews, or that no Chinese people own Greek delicatessens, or that very few Japanese are rabbis. Certain people don't choose certain professions.
There's familial patterns there. There's certain legacies to be followed.
Patterns,
Sure.
There's histories and backgrounds that create certain sense of direction. Why is a black person much more likely to be interested in athletics than a Jew or an Italian? An Italian is much more likely to be an athlete than a Jew. A Jew is much more likely to be a scholar than a German. People have converted, they're so desperate to fight inequality, which is a good thing to do, which is great to fight inequality. There should not exist inequality. But they're so desperate to prove the point that they've lost sight of reality now. We went from one extreme to the other. Every revolution has its extremes. Because there was real discrimination before, everybody took up arms against it. They took up arms against it with such intensity that now they invent discrimination to prove that they're fighting something. It makes them feel great. It's like an exorcism for guilt-ridden people to fight discrimination by creating it when it doesn't exist.
There's a certain familial pattern in your family because there's so many rabbis, yourself included,
Right.
But you felt you had to actually leave in order to make $1 or $2.
Well, I think if I wasn't a comedian today, my whole family would be starving to death. I think the best news they ever had is that I became a comedian. Because when I first wanted to become a comedian, my whole family was desperately against it, because in a religious Orthodox family, everything I do is some degree of a violation of Orthodox traditional Judaism. the strictures of severely Orthodox Judaism that I come from means that you can't work on a Friday night, you can't tell a joke on a Thursday, you have to say a prayer on a Friday, you have to walk slow on a Tuesday, you can't take an elevator, you can't walk fast, slow, you can't talk, you can't dance, you can't touch a girl, you can't say hello to an old man, a Jew, a dad. There's 8 million rules and regulations about everything you do. And if you're religious enough, you get a great pride in observing every one of these rituals, and every one of them makes sense. I'm making a joke out of it, but they make sense. They make a person into a much better person. Even an attitude.
So you're
supposed to fight it to make sure that you only have love and compassion in your voice and in your heart the rest of your life.
Are you a reformist?
I'm not a reformist in the sense that I don't believe in it. I believe in it, but I don't conform to all the rituals involved in it.
You have a lot of fun with it,
though.
But
I tried very hard to aspire to all the qualities that are inherent in it, all the human factor involved in it, the teaching and the preaching of compassion and concern for your fellow human being. There's no greater preaching on the site than what you learn as an Orthodox Jew about your concern for your fellow man.
But you have a lot of fun with the reformists and the fact that there are some Jewish people that don't want to admit they're Jewish.
Right.
They think it's out now to be too Jewish. You have a lot of fun with that in your show.
I have a lot of fun with it because I think it's a sad, sick state of affairs among a lot of Jews who feel so alienated by everything Jews suffered from in the past that they have to spend their whole time trying to lose their identity as a Jew. I said in my act, and it's true, that the only people who can't stand my accent are Jews, who find it an embarrassment to sound so Jewish. Well, the proof of the matter, the proof is that Jews have always struggled and suffered to negate or deny their Judaism, because they've always felt self-conscious about it. So while they were proud of it in one direction and helped the Jewish temples grow and Jewish theology grow and Jewish philosophy grow, at the same time, on a personal level, they always try to look like they're not too Jewish, as if Jewishness is sort of crude, as if it's low class. A Jew admires a French accent or an Italian accent, but he's nauseous when he hears a Jewish accent.
I represent the Jew who was always too Jewish to be in show business. And the people who decided that I don't belong in show business are the Jews. But Jews have a big problem with me, because Jews spend their whole life trying to prove they're not Jewish. Sounding Jewish doesn't sound good. You're not supposed to even look Jewish. You're allowed to be Jewish and be proud that you're Jewish, but you're not supposed to look it. Every Jew tells you, I'm proud to be Jewish. Then they spend their whole life cutting off their names, their noses, cutting off their...
Jackie, is there really a direct correlation between Jewish participation in activities and sports insofar as the pain level is concerned?
It's not just the pain level, it's a whole sense of direction that Jews have. The Jews have a sense of direction that you have to overcome the history of rejection, the history of persecution, discrimination, and the best way to overcome it is to achieve as much as possible. That's why scholarship and accomplishment, whether it's in business or in scholarship, it's to achieve something important so that you will not be discriminated against, so that the rest of society would need you, depend on you, that you should be so important that you'll overcome any possible temptation of anybody to knock you out of the box. So no Gentile could say we should throw the Jews out of the country. All of a sudden we won't have an accountant, a lawyer, all of a sudden we won't hear music, we won't find a comedian, all of a sudden everybody that we need is not here.
So a negative becomes a positive, a very big positive, doesn't it?
Right, that's why scholarship and accomplishment became everything to a Jew. They didn't want it, that's why they never became just hard workers like the things that you can accomplish very easily. Because if there's 1,000 of them, they could live without you. But if you're 1 in 100, they have to depend on you.
And the parents were always fighting with them about their marks, that unless they had the highest mark, they got nothing to live for. A Jewish parent wouldn't even say hello to you if you didn't get the highest mark in the history of the neighborhood. That's why Jews were never as involved in athletic activities, because it takes a lot of time and effort to be a great athlete. You almost never see a Jewish football player. In all of the United States, there hasn't been a Jewish football player in about 40 years. You throw a Gentile a football, he plays with it. You throw a Jew a football, he runs around. Who wants to buy a football?
And isn't it interesting that the hero worship that exists in this country revolves around the athletes? And to a certain extent, the political figures, albeit some of them might not be so straight.
Athletics is a big thing in this country because it's a great outlet from the constant, overwhelming problems that people face and the grind of everyday living. And there's a lot of competitiveness in a competitive society because we call it a competitive society, which means you're struggling and competing all the time. And to make ends meet is always a problem because everybody is living above their means. Because we live in a society that is a materialistic country that decides that you're only as important as how much money you got or what you bought last. So everybody's trying to buy things they can't afford, and everybody's credit card is overstretched by mountainous numbers, and everybody is struggling and suffering to catch up with problems they invented themselves that they could live without. And then from the pressure of all this, they want to get involved in something that doesn't involve them so much, that involves somebody else, and you could be the watcher, and you could have a good time watching somebody else struggle and fight to see who's going to win the game, and you could relax that way. It's a great escape for people who are struggling a lot of misery in their own lives. There's an undercurrent of misery together with all the happiness people have in our society. Because you can't spend all your time racing, competing, comparing and fighting and trying to figure out how much money you got compared to how much you spent and could you afford the next thing you wanted to buy that somebody else got that you could have had that you don't know why you don't have. And this business of catching up all the time with something that makes society into a rat race. And that's why you say, thank God somebody's playing basketball. I can get out of myself for a minute and watch somebody else struggle and fight. Watching him jump and kill each other with a basketball becomes a fabulous outlet. It's harmless, it's beautiful, you can enjoy it and relax.
Is it true that the Jewish people became dentists seriously to treat all the Gentile hockey players? Is that true?
I don't know. Not exactly true, but the principle of what I said is very true. That you have to judge progress not by how many people are in a certain field, but by their disposition to go into that field.
You take on a lot of themes within the course of politically incorrect, but none with the veracity of the whole sexual harassment milieu that's going on right now. It seems to be running rampant in a way, doesn't it?
I said before that every revolution has its successes. When you're so infuriated about what happened before, if a person punches you in the mouth, you're not happy just to hit him back once. You want to hit him 10 times to make sure you don't do it again.
The piling on syndrome.
Because when you react to a frustration and from any kind of rejection, and you build up all this animosity for every injustice that you suffered from, it's not enough for you to just get equality. You also want to get even. There's an element within you that wants to get even with the son of a bitch that did it to you in the first place. That's why I say on my stage that so many women are claiming they're fighting for equality while they're more interested in vengeance. And there's an element of hate. That's why I use the example of the Lorena Bobbitt case. Almost every time I talk about the Lorena Bobbitt case, and I say how disgusting it was to humiliate and to what do you call that? Mutilate this man. There's always some woman who's hollering boo and other women who are applauding because they're getting on some level a thrill out of getting even with somebody. They would get a thrill out of seeing an innocent man busted in the mouth by a woman or thrown out of a window by a woman.
Sounds like a societal thrill to me. There were an awful lot of frustrated people out there.
Right,
that
there's a
reveled
lot
in it.
of frustrated people out there who didn't have an adequate expression for their hostility, and they didn't have an opportunity to express their contempt for what they were suffering from, and they couldn't get even with anybody when it was happening. It's like the guy who's working for a boss. He hasn't got the guts to talk back to the boss, and sooner or later he shoots his head off because he couldn't have the nerve to ask for a raise. It builds up more and more hate. Before you know it, the only answer that he could find is to blow the guy's brains out.
Like the guy who climbed the White House fence.
Right.
I mean, essentially, he'd just gotten fired from his job, and he jumps the fence with an unloaded gun and gets shot. I mean, that's a certain level of frustration you're talking about.
As little as a few years ago, if somebody wanted to buy a condom and they walked into a drugstore, any kind of a polite person in a polite neighborhood where anybody might know him was literally afraid to say he was trying to buy a condom. They would order cigarettes. They would walk in and say, cigarettes, cigarettes? Do you sell condoms? That was just the opposite. Now people are ashamed of cigarettes. They're proud of condoms.
I would say you're defending smoking in a way. It's just the right to be able to do it as part of free speech.
Here's
or free
another
expression.
example. We know smoking causes cancer.
There's
so we
some
know
funny
that
things
shouldn't
in your
be
show about
allowed to
that.
smoke in your building or in your house. But the extent to which it goes now is so idiotic that even when there's no proof whatsoever, you know that secondhand smoke, there is absolutely no proof that it hurts anybody or how much it hurts, who it hurts, where it hurts, nobody knows. But to make sure, they call everything secondhand smoking. So if you're smoking a mile and a half from a guy, he comes over, he drives down a mile and a half to tell you to put out the cigarette because you heard somebody smoking there. It's not enough to have a restaurant where you're not allowed to smoke. Now there's hotel floors where you're not allowed to smoke, on the floor. As if it's going to go through from one side of the floor to the other into a building across the street. The hotel could be a mile long. The whole floor is not allowed to have a guy smoking in it. As if 4 o'clock in the morning, if a guy is smoking in a room a block and a half from you, you're going to pass out. These laws are becoming absolutely idiotic.
The press materials claim that you're an equal opportunity offender. I thought that was a clever statement.
Well, I'm proud of offending people because I offend people not in ways that are ever personal, that are ever vicious or vindictive or bitter or sick. I offend indecency. I offend immorality. I offend fraud, chicanery, deception, liars and lowlifes I defend. I offend. And unfortunately, there's so much of it in what's considered a respectable society that in the most refined elements of our culture, the most respected elements, you find so much chicanery and low-life fraud. Yes. As much as you do in professional thieves. I don't think the whole mafia put together ever defrauded this country as much as the Defense Department did.
Do you think we're becoming more acerbic as a people and that everything that we see and participate in has to become more titillating in a way?
I don't see why that's true at all. I don't think why everything has to be more titillating. I think people are just as thrilled to see a baby found and saved, the life saved, a person helped. I think there's as much compassion today as there ever was among people. I think that we're a much more democratic and compassionate society, I think, than we ever were. There was a time Jews were ostracized, blacks were condemned, homosexuals were rejected, women were considered inferior. You see tremendous, unbelievable strides in the level of equality in American society. We don't even resemble the society we once were. Even as little as 25, 30, 40 years ago, if a Jew was looking for a job, it was impossible to find one. It said white Christian only. People were proud to hate. They were proud to tell you, I don't want a black person in my neighborhood. They should be in back of a bus. They should drop dead altogether. They should never live in this country. And they were proud to tell it to you. Today, if a guy is a bigot, you could tell that he's not proud of his bigotry because he hides it. He tells it to you from under a table or behind a truck. People are embarrassed to admit that they feel bigotry because that's not in the mainstream of America's thinking anymore. There's still undercurrents of it, but the fact that they have to hide when they tell it to you proves that it's an unacceptable way of life in this country. Here is a man like Colin Powell. Do you notice that when they talk about him running for president, they don't even mention the factor of his blackness or South African Americanism? You don't even hear it even practically mentioned because white people couldn't care less. There are still people who are sick enough someplace in a dungeon to bring it up with a hood on their faces. But a normal person, whether he's a Jew or a Gentile, the white population of America, I think the only thing they don't even think about when they consider him for president is the fact that he's black. It became an irrelevant factor. Take a look at Al Inspector. Al Inspector happens to be Jewish. I'm the only guy mentioning it on television. Nobody even talks about it. Jews might be a little self-conscious, but I noticed the Gentiles couldn't care less if he's Jewish or not. They know he's a guy running for president. They discuss his politics. And reams of columns have been written about this man running pro and con, but nobody has said a Jew is running. As little as 15 years ago, when John Kennedy was running for president, when was it, 20 years ago? The only thing you heard about was Catholicism. Could a Catholic be president? And at that time, a Jew was considered inconceivable. A black person was considered a person who shouldn't have the knife to even talk up. He should still be sweeping up in the basement. And Jews were considered people who don't belong here because they're either not citizens or they shouldn't be, and nobody was wondering how we could get him out of this country. If he was a homosexual, he certainly couldn't run for office. He'd have to run for his life. He was afraid to walk in the street. So to say that America hasn't made progress and that we're the kind of country we were is stupid. And to say that it's even worse than we were is idiotic. The only thing that's really worse in this country than ever before is the levels of crime.
That's true. So the Constitution is working.
I think the Constitution is an irrelevant issue in this whole story. The Constitution was here before, too. Nobody said any of this is unconstitutional. There were certain things that had something to do with voting rights and equal rights, but it didn't stop the venom, the hostility, the rejection, the hate. I say that it has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has to do with the mentality of the people. The people are much more agreeable to the idea of genuine equality, and their mental attitude towards each other is much more acceptable and much more tolerant, it's beyond tolerance. It's degree of acceptance and degree of readiness to accept brotherliness, not just tolerance. Tolerance is a negative. Tolerance means I'm willing to accept you even though I can't stand you. But it's beyond tolerance. I see real brotherliness, real companionship, real desire to not only get along, but work together and be together and live together.
Your show definitely engenders laughter, and I think it engenders a certain amount of understanding. And you want it to, don't you?
Of course. All my shows are basically a morality play. I take morality stands on issues constantly in all my shows. I like to say things that I think have meaning and depth and significance and punch holes in fraud and attack deception and make a vicious nonsense out of the standards and the hypocrisies that we live by in so much of our culture. So much crookedness and lies that goes on in society, and I'd like to attack it and to prove to people how idiotic it all is.
How about that? You were included in the company of Gandhi, John Kennedy, and Jimmy Carter. And you are to be honored and admired for what you did during the Persian Gulf War. You were essentially a peacemaker, a mediator.
Well, I don't look for credit for anything I do, but I'm glad you brought it up. I'm probably a nicer person than most people. I don't like to talk about it, but if it comes up, it helps to realize that decent people could get ahead in life, and I'm proud and happy and thrilled about being able to do anything that serves any purpose of any good, whether it's for Jews or Gentiles or blacks or anybody else. Because the truth of the matter is that everybody in this society is so busy with their own problems, trying to fight for their own status. There's nothing phonier than politicians telling me that they go into politics to help people. 99% have never helped anybody in their life. Tell them to sweep up in a poor neighborhood. Tell them to volunteer in a hospital. You think they're running? They go to an earthquake. Do they ever help any victim of an earthquake? They fly over the earthquake in a very comfortable, fancy plane, and then they report to you how everybody else is suffering, but they don't hang around with the people from the earthquake. They don't want to have nothing. They don't go because only Jimmy Carter ever picked up a sleeve to help anybody.
Tony, Emmy, Outer Circle Critics Award, just one award after another. As you progress through your Broadway shows and your one-man shows, I mean, is there something that you have learned or something that you felt that you have developed along the way?
To me, life is just a learning process every day. I love to understand and appreciate what everybody has on his mind and to see what I could glean from everything I come across. I find I have as much a curiosity about life today as I did when I was 12. Because the ever-changing nature of societies and comparative differences that keep taking place in the way things change and grow and develop, the twists and turns of the fates of the universe, the behavior patterns of people, the cultural difference in different combinations of minorities and characters, the age differences, the cultural differences, every kind of difference and every kind of development that represents anything that's happening in a human being is a great fund of knowledge, information, and experience. And I think there's nothing that's not interesting that's going on anywhere. And I think you could endlessly learn from every minute of your life how people could be bored or say that because of age or because of time, they don't have the inspiration, the drive, the energy, I don't make a bit of sense to me, because curiosity doesn't take that much drive or energy. It just takes inquisitiveness. Inquisitiveness you could do sitting still on a chair. You don't have to play basketball to be inquisitive. You don't have to be a prize fighter to learn what's happening. The thing that takes least energy is the learning process.
What does Jackie Mason like to do in his free time?
I like to run a conversation like I'm doing with you. I like to explore people's minds. I like to sit in coffee shops. I like to watch people. I like to understand them. I like to see if I can help people who need a helping hand here and there. I like to see who's worthy of a benefit and how I could help them make a few dollars. I'd like to see if I could tell a few extra jokes to an elderly person who looks lonely, to buy somebody a sandwich and give them some conversation. You know what I find? I find that everybody wants to give you money, but nobody wants to give you their time. And they absolve their guilt trip by giving you cash. If they send a few dollars to a poor person, they feel like a wonderful person. And they should feel like a wonderful, because it is wonderful. But if the elderly person says, I want to talk to you, they got no time. And if you want to help people, why is helping people with money more important than helping them with a little companionship? They need companionship more than money in most cases. But that's real effort, and nobody wants to sacrifice that. That takes time, and that's more important to expend than money. And I think people should dedicate themselves to giving a few moments of their time to the lonely people of America, and not just their cash.
My very best friends who care the most about my career, my agents, my managers, anybody who's involved with me personally said, don't go to England, they won't understand you, they won't know what you're talking about. They don't know of a Jew of this kind, and they won't understand. Nobody thought so. Then I performed for the Queen of England, the Royal Command performance. And she got so excited that after the show, she started to talk like me. She came over to me right after the show. She said, all right, that wasn't that good, but it was good.
Jackie's dedication to finding the truth at the heart of the matter, and however painful it might be, presenting it in a way that inspires laughter and understanding, are unparalleled. Until next time, remember, art was meant to be appreciated, so you be a part of it.